r/AskReddit. Guys of Reddit. What is your worst meeting the dad moment when dating someone new? Not really meeting the dad, but I guess this is awkward enough to count. Now, my girlfriend is mixed race. She's a dark-skinned Brazilian, and they think she's half black. After we had been dating for a few months, I helped her move out of an apartment and into her mom's house. On the way to her house she says something like, "I don't know if my mom is home right now." Cool, whatever. I'm usually good with parents, so whether she's there or not doesn't really bother me much. We get to the house and start moving stuff. There's this little old white lady comes over and starts talking to us. No one introduces me, and she doesn't say hi. I'm your girlfriend's mom. I assume that she's a neighbor, or maybe a friend or something. I do not introduce myself, and remain pretty quiet the whole time we're there. As we're leaving, the little white lady hands me a container of brownies and a card with $50 in it to thank me for helping move. I didn't want to accept it, because I had no idea who this woman was. Now, at this point I should mention that in the year I had known my girlfriend at that point, nobody mentioned that she was 1. Adopted. 2. Her adopted mother was an elderly white woman that raised her alone. So imagine my horror when I realized the woman that I had been so dismissive of turns out to be my girlfriend's mother. Turned out okay. I poke fun at myself about it with her mom still. I had been dating this girl for about 3 to 4 months, and it was time to meet her family. We made arrangements and went over for dinner. He was nothing short of a fucking prisoner. I still refer to him as the prisoner. The entire night he barely spoke, and when he did it was only after being directly prompted by his wife or daughters, and it was always one-word answers. The entire dinner was them making jokes at his expense, making fun of him, while simultaneously spilling the beans on intimate personal details of his life. His wife treated him with absolute contempt and disdain, which was translated into how his daughters treated him as well. The only living thing in that house that had any affection for him was the cat. This man spent 30 years working his ass off as a civil engineer to raise a family. His wife never worked a day in her life, before or after him. He put 2 daughters through college, paid their fucking rent, on top of paying for their cars and basically everything else. And they treated him like a malfunctioning robot butler. His eyes were completely dead, like a lion who's been in the zoo too long. It scared the fucking shit out of me, so I broke up with her about a week later. It was like a visit from the ghost of Christmas future. My family owned an auto service station which I worked at while in high school. One day we have a gentleman come in and ask for brake fluid. We will call him John. John buys the brake fluid and leaves. A month or so later we get a letter from his attorney seeking damages because we supposedly put brake fluid in his transmission. Our lawyer wrote their lawyer and that's the last we heard. We were a full service station and I would pump gas for people, check their fluid levels, add fluids if necessary, etc. We had a woman who came by a couple times a month, Mary. One day Mary comes through and I added a quart of oil to her car, an older Mercedes. She comes back through that evening with oil all over the front of the car and accuses me of not replacing the oil filler cap, which I couldn't deny. Might have very well done that. I took my beating on it, cleaned the car, listened to her threaten my family, etc. Sometimes you learn the hard way. About a year after both of these incidents, I meet a girl at a friend's house. We start talking and set up a date. I pull up in her driveway. That green Mercedes looks familiar. Real familiar. I go to the door and the girl greets me. I walk into the living room and there's Mary watching TV. I look over at her dad and he looks up from a magazine. It's John. Well shit. I went blank there for a minimum. I think I said hi and exchanged small talk. I'm not absolutely certain. I only know that I wanted to leave. I dated this girl for a few months and her parents were civil. The incidents above never came up. I'm female, but I have a story that'll fit. Background: my dad is a very blunt man. Sweet as can be and would give you his last penny, but he's got no filter and will not even pretend to like someone if he doesn't. I had dated this guy in my early 20s who was a complete dick douche. I was too in love to see it or even care tbh. The first time he met my parents, my mom, the ever sweet southern debutante, was nice to him. My dad, not so much. Mom and ex we are talking, and mom notices that dad is leaned back in the chair sleeping. She wakes him up to tell him how rude he's being. My dad said might be rude, but I don't like that boy. Not gonna talk to him. Got nothing to say. Then friggin' went back to sleep. I was mortified. Dad loves my spouse though. Girl's father was in a wheelchair, but was built very well. He obviously lifted as much as he could from his confines. Girlfriend warned me he previously tried to break a guy's hand upon meeting him and shaking his hand. So, I went to meet him. He stuck his hand out to shake mine. I didn't hesitate, I shook his hand. He looked at his daughter, as if to say, if you weren't here, I'd totally snatch his hand off his wrist. Then he started giving me the talk about dating his daughter. He ended it with telling me about his .45 in a shelf. I really wanted to answer with this shelf right next to me, but across the room from you? But I decided against it. Apparently while we were out, her parents ransacked her bedroom and found our notes that we had written back and forth. I wrote words like shit and ass, so they forbade her from seeing me again. As a teenage dweeb, I dated this very sweet girl during my senior year of high school for a few months. She finally asked me over to have dinner at her family's house to kinda show the family that we are taking our relationship seriously. I had never met her parents before, nor had I even done a meet the parents before, so I was a little freaked out about how the introduction would go. We head over together to her house that evening and walk into the kitchen. Her mom greets us and seems delighted to meet me, which puts me in a good mood. Then she runs upstairs to grab her dad, who I can hear moaning and groaning about coming down. I didn't make out all of what they said, but I heard him distinctly say I'm not introducing myself to a 17-year-old dipshit who thinks he can touch my daughter. Oof, okay. My girlfriend and I awkwardly stand around pretending we are not hearing this stuff when we hear a fine, and the parents both walk back down the stairs. Her dad totally reluctantly, in this over-the-top way, extends his hand and says you're reticent? Literally just as I reach my hand out to say yes, I get a nosebleed. He stands there for a moment, mutters yup and walks straight out the back door to his wood shop, where he stayed for the rest of the night. Fuck that overdramatic asshole, I didn't even do anything wrong yet. I was seeing this girl when I happened to be in town and ran into her at a bus stop. We just about had time to say hi to each other before a very old woman tried to get on a bus, tripped over the step, and fell directly backwards, landing hard on her head. This girl's mum, who has been an NHS nurse for the last 25 years, then turned out to be there with her as well. She immediately began assessing this woman's injuries and trying to stop the bleeding from her head. A pair of paramedics arrived shortly and took over, not after my ex's mum had tried to shoo them away, informing them that she'd been doing this sort of thing since before they were born. And that's the story of how I first met my ex-girlfriend's very intimidating mother, while she was covered in an old lady's blood up to her elbows. Not the first time I had met the father, but easily the worst moment. I have a long distance relationship. Very long. Like Orlando FL to Istanbul long. There's a story in and of itself. I had recently flown to Turkey to meet her for our semi-annual be in the same country time when her parents found out I was in the country. Now, we aren't some secret lovers, quite the opposite, but if her parents aren't helicopters, they're flying saucers that threaten to abduct her and anybody near her at a moment's notice. Because I was in the city, they took it upon themselves to get a hotel and stay there for 3 nights and impose themselves into her life. The thing is, we are both adults. We had our own plans, and in my last day I had plans to meet a friend of my girlfriend that I had become something of a pen pal with. Then we were going to drink a shit ton of coffee, pull an all-nighter snuggling and doing the thing significant others do on their last night together, then drive out to the airport in the wee hours of the morning to avoid Istanbul traffic on the way to the airport. Ha ha ha. No. My girlfriend's father, convinced she's a paste-eating moron who can't plan anything. He's a logistics manager for military contractor who has a profound ability not to leave work at work, decided to buy us a hotel room much closer to the airport, so we wouldn't have to deal with traffic, regardless of any plans we had. After a 2-hour argument, it's decided that we are taking this hotel because he already paid for it, and he proceeds to drive us from the Asian side of this mega city to the European side, so we can check into the hotel we don't want to be in. But that's not all. He then asks what we want to do for the rest of the afternoon/do for dinner, to which we both explain, for the 4th time, we had dinner plans with somebody else on the other fucking side of the city. And to a lesser extent her mother, proceeds to throw a passive-aggressive hiss fit as he finally yields to drive us back, because we can at least spend time together on the drive. I didn't realize how terminal those words would prove. Not 15 minutes into the drive he takes a weird detour to go to a shop and get some water. He's stalling. Then we see the clock. 4 PM, 1600 hours for you international people. It is the height of Istanbul traffic. This is a city with a larger population than the entire nation of Greece that has only recently begun an automobile familiarity close to what the US has mastered. This is New York traffic with Florida level drivers. A godless wasteland that Mad Maximum couldn't survive in because there's nowhere to move. And this guy chooses the longest way back to my girlfriend's apartment, despite us 4 having other plans. After all of that, the man insists we have dinner because it is now 8 o'clock by the time we finally get to the other side of the city. We finally part ways. I have a truncated meeting with my pen pal, and we have to take the metro back to the European side, conveniently free to the public at the moment, and get a cab back to the hotel. Probably not the worst moment in this thread, but easily the most frustrating time I've spent with any borders folks. I'm a white guy who dated a Palestinian girl in 1st/2nd year university. I live in Canada and grew up with a huge multitude of people from different backgrounds etc. So I never really thought much about how people might differ in how they handled things. I guess I just figured everyone was kind of the same, more or less. I learned a lot. For the first few months it didn't matter, because it was fairly low-key, and I just liked spending time with her, so I didn't mind not meeting her family. But eventually I either asked, or she told me, that she had to keep it secret from them, because they would freak out. I was basically like, okay, I'm sure they're traditional, but I'm sure it won't be that bad. Once they meet me, and see I'm not a shithead, I'm sure it'll be fine, right? She was just like, I don't think so. Eventually they found out, of course. And freak out they did, her father in particular. It was pretty intense, to say the least. First he freaked out on her and physically abused her a bit. He then called me from her phone and told me if I wanted to be with her, I had to convert to Islam. Then I could buy her a ring and propose to her, at which point I would be allowed to see her every once in a while under his direct supervision. Once we were married, I would be allowed to see her more often, and I'm guessing unsupervised. I was 19 or 20 at this point. It's also worth noting that his daughter was basically your average Canadian girl. She didn't wear a hijab or anything, and had drank alcohol a few times before, and quite enjoyed it. In any case, her and I decided that was pretty fucked, and neither of us was down, though we did want to stay dating. So we did. That's when shit really hit the fan. He really ramped up the physical abuse, even literally torturing her, choking her out with a phone call while interrogating her, at one point to get information about me, in particular what had we done sexually. We had been having sex, and I'm pretty sure he had access to her phone, records/texts, since he paid for her phone, so I'm pretty sure he put 2 and 2 together. He wanted her to get a virginity test. Eventually, she had enough and decided it was time to leave, so she left to stay with me. This really ramped shit up even more. He threatened to kill me and her. He threatened to kill her brother and himself. He threatened to kill her pet rabbit. He said he would abuse her younger brother, who she loved more than anything. Her mother said some of the most foul shit I have ever seen to her. She was told she would be completely disowned from her family, of course, which was harsh for her, since it was important. She had something like 46 first cousins. Her Muslim girlfriends who she had grown up with berated the fuck out of her constantly, called her a disgusting whore. I was a white piece of shit. I would certainly burn in hell. They didn't really know me, and though I was a bit of a shithead in high school, I was doing well in university and had cleaned up my act. But regardless, I was basically subhuman and ruining her, and she was a backstabbing whore of a daughter to her father. So after a few days, her uncle reached out to her and was much more understanding and nice. I spoke with him as well, and he was extremely reasonable and said the best thing would be to let things calm down. She could stay with him in the meantime and he would calm her dad down and make sure he didn't do anything crazy, like kill us. It seemed like a good option, so that's what we did. It was a really stressful time. Her father still forced her to go get her virginity checked. She actually got a doctor to do it, i.e. she went in the room with the doctor. The doctor, who was a woman, said alright, so what do you want me to tell them, cause this is fucked, and she was magically a virgin again. She eventually returned home. Shit started to get crazy again. More threats, more psychotic bullshit. She ended up needing to have the police escort her out of her house and brought to a woman's shelter, but that place was not at all great, so she left pretty much immediately to come stay with me. It was actually New Year's Eve. I was outside the woman's shelter waiting in the freezing ass cold for nearly an hour right through the new year, and yet it was still an incredibly great time because I was so much less stressed out knowing she was out of that shit and not being abused constantly. When she came out, she had a huge smile on her face and we kissed and walked off into the shitty frozen tundra together. Sometime later, her father showed up at the door of my apartment one morning and my dear roommate let him in because he didn't really know what was going on. This guy was never usually around and we weren't really friends or anything. So he comes to our room and says, "Hey, someone's here to give mail to, girlfriend's name." I'm all groggy and like WTF. "Okay, I'll get it, no worries," and go to the door. I may not even have been wearing a shirt, I can't remember. Still half asleep, I walk over to the doorway, just down a short hallway from my room, and I'm like, "Hi, you have something for her?" He's like, "I have to give it to her directly." Super stern and grilling me hard, but my brain couldn't put two and two together. I go get her and tell her, and she starts shrieking witches when I realize who the guy in my doorway is. Now I'm freaking out. How the fuck does this guy know my apartment number? I was on the 12th floor too, so he got let in the building and knew my exact unit number somehow. It wasn't listed in the directory. She goes and talks to him, and I'm waiting around the corner ready to storm this guy if he tries anything, but luckily they just talked briefly and he left. So yeah, I would say meeting that father, half asleep, possibly not wearing a shirt, evidently waking up from sleeping with his daughter who he threatened to kill us all over, is probably my worst meeting the dad moment. Edit. Holy fuck, this blew up. Here's some answers to some of the questions. Sorry I didn't respond to much yet. Inbox got murked, and I left for vacation shortly after writing this. What happened next? Things calmed down, we continued dating, and she lived with me for a while, before getting a spot with roomies. Our relationship had some other issues as well, and over time those caused us a lot of problems. We ended up breaking up around the 2-year point. I haven't talked to her in about 3 years, but last I heard she went back home, and is still dating some other white guy who they approve of, I guess. I can't help but feel like 1, an asshole for causing all that shit and not being with her forever, and 2, for taking all of that shit and breaking the ice for the next person to swoop on in without having to deal with anything. But both of those feelings are foolish when you think about it. The bunny and her brothers were okay. Her younger sister got extremely sanctimonious and extra religious, so that's cool. When my husband met my father, we'd been invited to drink at a bar in my hometown. I knew what my father was planning, so I tried to stick close to hubby most of the night. What I didn't know was that my cousins, all plus 30 years of age, were also there and had been told by my father that I'd brought along my boyfriend. My mother facilitated it by asking him to get her a drink at the bar while I was in the loo. He was swiftly pulled aside and bullied by four of my male family members. They threatened to break his spine and both legs if they saw something they didn't like. Funny thing is, that little interaction didn't scare him in the slightest. What scared him was a year later, at a birthday bash, my little 5'3" aunt, drunk as a skunk, began twiddling his ear piercings and almost pulling them off in the process, while she gyrated to the music behind his chair. That scared the shit out of him. Me, normal white guy, her, super attractive black chick. After a few weeks of dating, she invited me to her house for dinner to meet her parents. Her mom and brother were really awesome. Her dad, though, essentially put me in a corner and started going off on me about how I'm some white boy that's only with his daughter, so I could put another notch in my belt, and that us white boys only like banging black chicks for bragging rights. Everybody, myself included, thought he was just joking at first, but soon their mouths were hanging open, and it was pretty apparent that they were super embarrassed. This went on for about 10 minutes. At the time I was running a gun range, so his family stopped him when he said, "I bet you just sit at home waiting for some nigga to break in, just so you can shoot him." It was also odd. Completely unprovoked. He was the only asshole out of an entire family that had been one of the coolest I've met. Our relationship dive-bombed after that. My now father-in-law is a retired corrections officer, but at the time of this story, he was still working. I met him the first time I picked up my now wife, me 23/her 20 at the time, for a date, and he a genuinely nice guy. Shook hands, no stern talk, just the typical treat her well and have fun. So all is good, or so I think. On our third date, he decides to fuck with me. I pull up to the house, knock, and he answers, since my wife is still getting ready. Now I think about the fill, he's quite the winnow, something I didn't know at the time, but unless he's hammered you really can't tell he's been drinking. So I come in, and we small talk a bit, nothing out of the ordinary. After about 5 minutes I hear my wife yell she's almost ready, so I stand up to get ready to leave. At this time he walks over, throw his arm around my shoulder and says, "Well, you kids have fun, but just know that anything ever happens to my daughter, my friends can run a lot faster than you." He proceeds to reach into his pocket and drop a .45 round in my hand, pat me on the back and walk away. I just stand there frozen, in my "oh shit, what I have gotten myself into" moment. My wife comes out, yells bye, grabs my hand, and off we go. Needless to say, it was a very interesting car ride to dinner. In the end, he truly was just fucking with me, but he knew it was a father's right to do so as he saw fit. Looking back now, it's a pretty funny story to tell, but at 23, fresh out of college, it was terrifying. So clearly I married this girl, but the best part of this story came years later at the wedding. At the wedding, he gets up to give his father of bride speech. For the most part it normal, super positive, and super supportive. As he's winding down, he walks over to us and finishes his speech in epic fashion. "I wish you all the happiness in the world, but just remember, if you ever hurt my daughter, my friends can always run faster than you." As he proceeds to drop from more .45 rounds in my hand, drops the mic and walks away. Our guests went crazy cheering his speech as I put my head down on the table laughing and holding the ammo up in the air. The photographer has a great picture of this, while my wife is laughing. We've been meaning to get the picture and ammo framed, but we haven't for some reason yet. The best part is the majority of our family and friends never knew about the first half of the story, which I then got to recount several times later throughout the night. My Phil and I have a good laugh about this every now and then. Story from a girl's path, but I'm pretty sure that dude I was dating at the time would say this was his worst meeting the dad moment. It was the early morning hours of my 16th birthday, so like 12 to 1 AM. I had been dating this guy for about 2 weeks. He was 5 years older than me, yes, I know, creepy, etc. And he was dropping me off at my house after getting dinner at Jeffrey's, lol. My curfew was 12 AM, so me being the 16Y/O genius I was, decided that if we were making out in his car in the driveway, that technically meant I was not breaking curfew because I was home. I was kind of a shit. This was in the early days of cell phones, so I had just gotten one, and I get an incoming call from my dad at around 12:30 AM from the house phone. He's obviously angry because he thinks I'm not home yet. "Where are you?" "In the driveway, Dad," I said, all cheery at how amazingly my idea was going to work. He immediately hangs up, and I know shit is about to go down. I say my goodbyes, get out of the car, and start booking it to the front door. On the way there I run into my dad, in his boxers, hair all messed up, obviously had just woken up, and his face is very red. He just looks right at me and goes, "Fuck you." Also more confirmation that shit was about to go down, cause he had never said that to me, even when I was being the shittiest of shits. The guy didn't even have time to back out of the driveway, so my dad walks up to his car door, flings it open, and goes, "What makes you think you can keep my daughter out this late?" He just stares at him in utter terror as his answer. Then he proceeds to say, "I don't want to see you again. At the earliest, September." It was late July. Then slammed the door and silently went back inside and went to sleep. My favorite part was I guess he reasoned with himself when making his threat and decided that he'd be okay with seeing him in September, I guess. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.